chisel slipped and the stone bit back. Maren pressed her palm flat against the gash running across her knuckles, feeling the heat of it before she felt the pain. Around her, the forge yard of Caldermount Keep lay half destroyed. The eastern wall reduced to rubble, the weapon racks splintered, and somewhere beneath the smoke, the dragon lord of the northern reaches was bleeding to death on the flagstones. She was not supposed to be here. The place was in the stone-carver's workshop, at the back of the keep, where she spent her days chipping the rough edges off commemorative plaques and repairing the ornamental friezes that the older wolves shredded when their tempers got the better of them. She was not a healer, was barely anything, according to the Heldrath clan who had taken her in 11 years ago, a wolfless ward from a collapsed pack, useful for her hands and invisible for everything else. But the healers had scattered when the Ashbourne raiders broke through the gate, and no one else was coming. Calder Voss, dragon lord of the northern reaches, had taken 3 spear wounds to his left side. She could see bone. His breathing came in a sound she would never forget, a wet, grinding catch like stone, dragging against stone. His wolf form had receded when he lost consciousness, leaving him human and enormous and dying on the ground. And his blood was doing what blood does, spreading outward in a slow, patient tide that had already reached her knees. Maren had her carving tools, that was all. A fine chisel, a rasp, 2 wedges, a length of copper wire she used to hang patterns from the workshop ceiling, and a small pot of bonding compound she mixed herself. Pine resin, rendered marrow fat, and powdered ironbark root. She used it to seal fractures in stone so that the break became invisible. She had never used it on anything living. She looked at the wounds, she looked at the wire. Copper would not hold shifter tissue, but she knew this the way she knew everything she was not supposed to know, by listening from doorways, by sitting quietly in corners where people forgot she was there. Shifter flesh rejected anything inorganic. It needed something living, something the body would accept as its own. She looked at her hands. 11 years of stone work had done something to them. The skin was calloused to a thickness that other women in the keep sometimes touched with expressions of mild horror, and the tendons beneath were roppy and dense from years of gripping and striking. But it was not her skin she was looking at. It was her hair. She had worn it in a single long braid her entire adult life, the kind of braid that stays tight through a full day of hammering and never frays at the edge because her hair had always been like that, dense and coarse and resistant in a way that had made the other girls in the Heldrath dormitory call it horsehair and not kindly. She had learned to be grateful for it. In winter, it kept her warm. In the forge yard, it stayed out of her face without pins. She unraveled the braid with 3 practiced movements. She did not think about what she was doing. If she thought about it, she would stop. She took the carving knife from her belt and cut, but feeling the familiar slight resistance of her own hair, and began separating the strands the way she separated stone fibers when she worked with layered slate, pulling with the grain, not against it, until she had something thin and consistent and surprisingly strong. She threaded the copper needle she used for detail work. The first stitch drew a sound from Calder Voss that was not human, a low, reverberant growl that travelled through the stone beneath her and settled in the marrow of her knees. His eyes opened. They were grey, not the flat grey of overcast sky, but the deep, shifting grey of granite under running water, that catching light she could not locate the source of. And they found her face with an attention that stopped the air in her throat. She did not stop stitching. If she stopped, he would die. Something happened at the second stitch. She felt it through the needle, through the wire handle, through her fingers, up into the bones of her wrist. A vibration, not painful, not pleasant, like striking the exact resonant frequency of a particular stone, that moment when the whole piece hums back at you and you understand for the first time what it is made of. It spread up her arm, settled behind her breastbone, and pushed against something there that she had long since decided was simply absent, her wolf. She had not felt it since she was 9 years old, standing in front of Elder Cass, with her hands shaking while he told her mother's ghost that the child had no wolf, no bond, no use to any pack that wanted to survive the decade. She had felt it leave her. She had heard the silence it left behind the way you hear a stopped clock. Not the ticking you miss, but the particular quality of the quiet. But now, at the third stitch, something moved. Not stirring, not tentative. It was more like the feeling of a great weight shifting beneath ice, the whole surface responding to something enormous changing position far below. Col de Vos had not spoken, watched her work with those granite eyes, and she watched the grey undertone of dyeing recede from his skin stitch by careful stitch, as if each pull of the hair thread was returning something to him that had been leaking out. She was on the 8th stitch when the Heldrath guards found them. "What is the stone-carver doing?" The voice came from behind her, flat with disbelief. "She's stitching him with her hair." A second voice, sharper. "Someone get her away from." A hand grabbed her collar and hauled her upright. The needle pulled free, and a single drop of blood from her cut palm fell onto Calder's chest. Where it landed, the stone grey of his skin pulsed gold. Once, faded, the hand released her. She stumbled forward and caught herself on the broken wall. When she turned, the 2 guards were staring at the place on Calder's chest where her blood had been. The faces wore an expression she had never seen aimed in her direction before. She took her a moment to name it. Reverence. Col de Vos pushed himself upright. The movement was impossible. 8 minutes ago he had been 3 spear wounds past consciousness. But the stitches she had placed were holding, and not just holding. The edges of the wounds had begun to contract around the hair thread, the tissue accepting it the way dry stone accepts water. "Come here," he said. His voice was low and abraded, like stone that had been weathered but not broken, and it carried in the ruined yard the way only a dragon lord's voice carries, filling every space so completely that the idea of not listening became structurally impossible. Maren did not move. She was still holding the copper needle in one hand and her carving knife in the other, and she was suddenly and acutely aware of how she must appear, her work tunic stained with his blood and hers, her hair loose and uneven where she had cut the strand, her hands permanently darkened by ironbark compound, the knuckles scarred from 11 years of stone, the palms calloused to something that barely resembled the hands of a woman her age. "Come here," he said again, not softer, but slower, the way you slow your movements around something wild that has every reason not to trust you. She walked to him. She knelt, because her legs had decided the matter before her mind could intervene. He took her hand, the one with the cut, the one still bleeding slightly, and held it in both of his. His hands were large and call-used in a completely different way. Sword call-used. War call-used. And when his skin met hers, the vibration she had felt through the needle erupted into something else entirely. It roared through her like a fissure opening in a mountainside. The kind of fracture that looks like destruction until you understand it is the stone, finding its natural line, the place it was always meant to break and release what was inside. Her wolf surged. Not the tentative shift of something waking, the full, enormous weight of something that had been compressed into a space far too small for it, suddenly given room. "Bond," he said. The word was simple and geological, like naming a type of stone. Not dramatic, just accurate. "You are my bonded mate." "That is not possible," she said, because it was not. She was a wolfless ward with stone compound under her fingernails. She ate after the Heldrath pack finished and never complained about the cold because the stone-carver's workshop was unheated and she had long since stopped expecting otherwise. She was nobody. He turned her hand and pressed his mouth to the cut on her palm. She felt his breath, warm and measured, against the wound. "What is your name?" he said against her skin. "Maren, Maren." He repeated it with a care that made her feel each syllable distinctly, as if he were learning the grain of it. "Who gave you this scar?" He was looking at the older one, the diagonal line across her left palm from the time Elder Cass's son had slammed the stone-cutter's door on her hand for setting the chisel marks crooked on his father's memorial plaque. "It does not matter." "It matters to me," one of the guards shifted behind her. "My lord, the Ashbourne are regrouping at the south ridge. We need to move you to the inner hold." Calder did not look away from her. His grey eyes had not left her face since the moment they opened. "How many stitches?" "8, she said. "In the first wound. I had not finished the others." "Finish them." The guard stepped forward. "My lord, there is no time." Calder's voice dropped below speech into something older, a register she felt in her back teeth and the base of her sternum. "She will finish, and then we move." Maren picked up her needle. Her hands were not steady, and she did not pretend they were. She cut another length of hair, and as she threaded the needle, she felt the bond between them for the first time as a thing with physical presence, a warm, living tether that pulsed with each heartbeat and grew measurably stronger with each breath she took near him. She placed the 9th stitch, the 10th. Each one wove something she did not have a name for, not just flesh closing over flesh, a connection, point by point, the way you build a stone arch. Each piece supporting the next, the whole structure gaining strength from the pressure of itself. She could feel the echo of his pain, distant, like hearing the crack of stone from the next valley over. She could feel his wolf, vast and ancient, a particular fury of an alpha, whose mate was thin-wristed and scar-handed, and had clearly been permitted to go cold and hungry in ways he was only just beginning to understand. He placed the last stitch on the 3rd wound and tied it off. 23 stitches, 23 lengths of her hair woven into the Dragon Lord's body. She would learn later what that meant. The inner hold of Calder Mount smelled of cedar smoke and heated iron, and the closed warmth of too many bodies in too small a space. Dozens of wolves were already inside, some wounded, some working. All of them turned when Calder was carried in, with one hand locked around the fingers of a stone-carver from the back workshop, who looked like she hadn't slept properly in several weeks. The silence that fell was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of people witnessing something they did not have the language for yet. Maren expected whispers. She got nothing, and nothing was worse. Keep's senior healer, a compact woman named Dessa with iron-grey hair, and the manner of someone who had personally argued with death on multiple occasions and come away with a better record than death, took one look at the stitches and stopped moving. "What material is this?" Dessa said, leaning close. "Her hair," Calder said. From where he had been laid near the fire pit, Dessa touched the nearest thread with 2 fingers. Her hand flinched back. She looked at Maren with an expression that contained several things at once. Professional assessment, something that approached wonder, and something else, careful and quiet, that Maren could not read yet. "These are anchored," Dessa said slowly. "My lord, these stitches are not just closing tissue. They are. Each thread is carrying something." She paused in the way that people pause when the word they need does not exist in casual use. "These are bond stitches. The old texts call them grounding threads. Each one creates a connection point between 2 spirits." "I know," Calder said. Dessa looked at Maren. "Child, do you understand what you have done?" "I used what I had," Maren said. "It's that or watch him bleed out on the flagstones." "You used yourself." Dessa shook her head. "Every thread carries your essence, your wolf, your life force, your fundamental nature. 23 stitches, 23 connections." She met Maren's eyes. The only recorded soul bond in our history used 3 anchor points. 3. There is no precedent for 23. Calder's hand found hers again. She had managed to reclaim it twice during Dessa's examination, and twice he had simply, without apparent urgency, taken it back. His thumb moved over the scar on her palm in a slow, deliberate pass. "Good," he said. Dessa stared at him with the expression of a woman deciding whether to say the next thing. She said it, "My lord. If she is harmed, you will feel it as your own injury. If she dies, she will not die." His voice was very quiet. "She will not be harmed. Those are not wishes. Those are the terms under which everything in this keep now operates." The words settled over the room the way the first snowfall settles over a valley, without drama. Completely. He found out his full name from the warriors as they held the keep against the Ashborn through the next 2 days. Karl de Vos, Dragon Lord of the Northern Reaches, first of his bloodline to hold the Ash Compact together in 3 generations, and this was repeated to her by multiple people in tones that ranged from meaningful to barely concealed pleading. He had never taken a bonded mate. Not in 13 years of holding the Northern Reaches. Not once. The men did not know what to do with that. Her entire life's ambition until 48 hours ago had been to save enough of her workshop stipend, to replace the rasp she'd broken 6 months ago with a better one, the kind with the fine-grained face that didn't leave marks you had to sand out. On the second day, Calder found her in the corner of the inner hold, where she had unconsciously begun repairing a warrior's broken shield strap with a length of spare leather and the copper needle. But she had not noticed she was doing it until she was halfway through. Muscle memory, her hands doing what her hands knew how to do. He sat down beside her, not across from her. Beside, close enough that his shoulder touched hers, and the contact sent the bond vibrating with a warmth she was learning to stop flinching from. "Show me what you're doing," he said. She looked up. "I am mending a strap. Show me how." So she showed him. But she explained the way leather behaves under stress, where it wants to split and where it wants to hold. She described how different thicknesses needed different tension and how the direction of the stitch relative to the stress line was the difference between a repair that lasted a year and one that lasted 10 minutes. He talked about the properties of different binding materials, when you used copper wire and when you used thread and when, if you had it, you used catgut sealed with pine resin. He was explaining how to read the grain of a belt for weakness before it failed when she realized he was not looking at the strap. "What?" she said. "You go somewhere else when you talk about your work," he said. "Your voice changes, your posture changes." He paused. "You stop making yourself small." She looked down at the strap. She did not know what to say to that. No one in 11 years in the Heldrath keep had noticed what she did with her voice. "Maren, yes, when we return to Caldervane, you will not repair shield straps," she stiffened. "If you are releasing me from the keep's service, I can find work in the outer settlements. I have skills." He put his hand over hers, stilling the needle. "You will not repair shield straps because you will be my bonded lady. But if you want to work stone, to build, to create, not maintain, you will have the finest studio in the Reaches. Any materials, any tools." He paused. "I have been repairing other people's things for 11 years. There is a difference between repair and creation, and I think you have always known it." Her throat closed. She stared at their joined hands, enormous and dark against her compound-stained fingers, and she felt her wolf pressing against the surface of her for the first time in 26 years, not with urgency, but with something that sounded, if a wolf could sound like anything, like grief releasing. "I cannot be a bonded lady," she said very quietly. "I have no wolf. The Heldrath elders declared it when I was 9. I am ward-ranked, non-shifting." "The Heldrath elders were wrong," he said, and his voice carried a certainty so total and so bedrock deep that it did not argue with her statement. It simply replaced it, the way a well-placed foundation stone replaces unstable ground. The Ashbourne pulled back on the 3rd morning. The men tried to slip away to the kitchens while the victory count was underway. Because the kitchens needed hands, and the great hall made her feel like a stone sitting in the wrong quarry. The bond had other ideas. Every step she took away from Calder pulled taut in her chest with a physical pressure she could not ignore, and she could feel his awareness tracking her even with the length of the hold between them. She made it to the kitchen passage before he appeared behind her. For a man built like a cliff face, he moved with an unsettling silence. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To help with the post-siege, no." She turned. The passage was narrow, the light from a single burning pitch torch. He filled the space he occupied in a way that was not threatening, but was absolute. "I am not accustomed to being useless," she said, and there was an edge in it that surprised them both. Something shifted in his face, but irritation, interest. "Stitched me back together with a copper needle and your own hair," he said. "Calling that useless is either very humble or very dishonest." It was not a warrior's deed. He stepped closer. The torch threw the line of his jaw into relief, caught the scar bisecting his right brow. Maren. 23 soul bonds. The healers don't have a framework for it. The elders have been arguing since yesterday morning. The oldest texts they have record 3 as the maximum of any grounding bond in history. He paused. "You are not what the Heldreth clan told you you were." "Then what am I?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Mine," he said, "and we will learn the rest as we go." It should have frightened her. The possession of it, the certainty. Instead it reached into the cold, carefully managed place behind her sternum, where she had kept 11 years of careful non-expectation, and lit it from inside like a forge fire reaching stone that has been cold too long. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She turned and walked back to the great hall. After a moment, she heard him follow. The journey to Caldervane took 4 days, and Maren rode in the supply cart because she had never been on a horse, and declined every one of Calder's offers to remedy this, on the grounds that acquiring new skills during a political crisis seemed like poor timing. She spent the journey watching the northern reaches unfold around her, the granite ridges and black spruce valleys, the sky enormous in a way she had not been prepared for. Living inside keeps her whole life. She arrived at Caldervane with stone compound in her hair and blood on her tunic. The city rose from the bedrock itself, buildings cut directly from the mountain face in some sections, constructed in stone so precisely fitted you could not get a knife blade between the courses. She had known it was a stone-carver's city. She had not known it would feel, in the light of late afternoon, like something she recognized in a way she couldn't explain. Calder appeared beside her. "I have nothing to wear," she said, because it was concrete and manageable, unlike everything else. He looked down at her. The setting sun turned his grey eyes to something warmer. "That can be fixed," he said, and offered his hand. She took it. They walked up the carved steps together, and she did not think about how it looked, because she had spent 11 years managing how things looked, and it had never once been to her benefit. The rooms they gave her were an injury by kindness. She did not know how else to describe it. She had lived in a single room above the Heldreth workshop for 11 years, heated by proximity to the forge below, furnished with a pallet and a shelf for her tools. What she walked into now had vaulted ceilings and 3 windows, and a fireplace that had been lit before she arrived. The studio was what stopped her. The ceiling was angled glass, north-facing, a kind of light stone carvers, spent careers trying to find in a fixed building. The walls held every tool she had ever wanted, and several she had never known existed. Chisels of graduated sizes, rasps in 5 grades of fineness, mallets of different weights, calipers, straight edges, and an entire wall of raw material samples. Granite, limestone, soapstone, alabaster, marble of 3 colors, things she didn't have names for yet. She stood in the doorway and could not speak. Calder was behind her, felt him through the bond, a warm, steady pressure, the way granite feels warm in late afternoon sun when you press your palm flat against it. "Is this enough?" he said, and in his voice she heard something she had not heard from him before, a tentativeness, the particular uncertainty of someone who could command anything except the one thing they actually want. She walked to the nearest wall and ran her fingers over a block of soapstone, the color of winter cloud. She tested its surface with her thumbnail, reading the grain through touch the way she had learned to read it before she had language to describe what she was reading. "This is Kenmore soapstone," she said, "from the western quarries. I have only ever seen it in finished pieces." She turned to face him. There were tears on felt them fall. I do not understand. Why? He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her face in both hands. His palms were rough and warm, and they held her with the careful, total steadiness of something that had made up its mind. Because you gave pieces of yourself to save me, he said, without calculation, every strand. His thumbs moved across her cheekbones. This is not generosity, Maren. This is return. Every beautiful thing you were denied, I am going to spend a very long time returning it. She cried then, not the quiet kind, the kind that has been compressed into the space behind the stern for a decade and finally finds a fracture line, ugly and graceless and real. He held her through it with the steadiness of someone who has decided that waiting is not a burden. When it passed, she pulled back and wiped her face and said, in a voice that was wrecked but steady, I will make you something from this stone, the finest thing I have made, but I need time. He smiled. It was the first time she had seen it, and it changed his whole face. Something boyish and unguarded underneath the Dragon Lord, there and gone in an instant, leaving an after-image she kept returning to. Take all the time you need, he said. I am going nowhere. The court of Caldervane did not know what to make of her. The Lady Voss, Calder's mother, the dowager, arrived on the 5th day from her winter estate in the eastern passes. She was not what Maren expected. She had braced herself for the open contempt she understood from the Heldrath clan. What she received was something more precise. Lady Isolde Voss was handsome in the way old mountains are handsome. Not soft, not warm, but undeniably shaped by something enormous over a very long time. She visited the studio on the pretext of welcoming Maren to the household, and she walked through it the way an assessor walks through a property, touching surfaces, reading the tools, noting what was present and absent. Son tells me you saved his life, she said, settling into the chair by the window. I stitched his wounds, Maren said. That was all. With your hair. Lady Isolde's eyes moved to Maren's hair, still shorter and uneven from the cutting. Practical. There was nothing else to use. My niece Anya studied field medicine at the Valdron Academy, Lady Isolde said. Her tone was the tone of someone sharing information, nothing more. Would have had proper suture materials, proper technique. She paused, precisely timed. But I imagine in a crisis, one works with what is available. Maren kept her face neutral. She had spent 11 years learning to keep her face neutral, while receiving information designed to reduce her. I hope to meet Anya, she said. I understand she is knowledgeable. Lady Isolde's expression shifted by a degree that only someone watching very carefully would notice. After she left, the men went to find Sable, Calder's chief advisor, a whip-lean woman with close-cropped dark hair and eyes that tracked everything in a room simultaneously, had been introduced to Maren on the first day with the frank assessment, You are sharper than you look. Good. You'll need to be. Tell me about the niece, Maren said. Sable looked at her with an expression that might have been approval. Anya Voss, 28. Lady Isolde has been positioning her as a potential bonded match for Calder for 2 years. She will not accept your existence easily, and Lady Isolde will not help her do so. She paused. The Lady Dowager is not cruel, exactly. She is efficient. She removes obstacles, and she has decided, not yet publicly, that you are one. How do you know that? Because she sent a seamstress to measure you this morning while you were in the studio, Sable said. Whatever she's having made for you will either fit incorrectly or be inappropriate for the role. That is how she begins. Maren thought about that on the walk back to her rooms, and when the parcel arrived that evening, formal wear for the council dinner in a severe midnight charcoal that would have suited someone twice her age, and 2 sizes broader through the shoulders, she felt a cold, familiar recognition settle into her bones. She altered the garments herself that night. She had no formal dress fabric, so she worked with what the studio had. Thin canvas, the good linen she had been planning to use to cover raw stone during the winter months, a length of waxed thread that behaved, after careful handling, like something intentional. She cut the shoulders down, took the waist in, let the hem fall where it was meant to fall. She added nothing that was not already there, except fit, but she walked into the council dinner in a garment that fit her correctly, and she watched Lady Isolde's eyes move over it with the attention of someone reading an argument. Calder noticed. He noticed the way he noticed everything about her, steadily, completely, without performance. He looked at her across the dining hall, through a crowd of advisors and warriors, and the hovering anxiety of 14 people who wanted something from him, and even at that distance, through the bond, she felt his attention like a hand pressed flat against her sternum. Looking her back to her rooms afterward, their hands loose and easy together in the way she was still learning to allow, he said, "The garment was different from what arrived. The original did not fit. Who sent it?" She hesitated for only a breath. "Your mother was kind enough." Maren, his voice was quiet. The grey of his eyes had deepened. "Who sent them?" "Lady Isolde." "But it was a small thing," she added, before she could stop herself. "I am accustomed." "You are no longer accustomed to anything that diminishes you." He said it without anger, but the way he said it closed the sentence entirely, leaving no room for objection. He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles. "Good night, Maren." She stood in her doorway for a long time after he left, one hand pressed to the place on her chest where the bond was something she could no longer pretend was imaginary. And she thought, when did I start believing I might deserve this? The dream came on the 4th night. Stone, not the quarried kind, not the fitted kind, living stone, the kind that forms itself, that pushes upward through the earth over centuries, and carries in its grain a record of everything that has ever pressed against it. She stood in the middle of a landscape that was all granite and pale sky, and moving through the stone, not over it, through it, were wolves, enormous, silver-white, their forms half-translucent, moving like light moving through quartz. They moved toward her. She was not afraid. She stood on the bare granite in her bare feet, and the wolves circled her in silence. And the largest among them, a female with a scar running from muzzle to ear and eyes the color of deep water, pressed her nose to Maren's hand. "You came late," the wolf said. "We expected you sooner." Maren woke with her hands cold, not cool, but cold, the particular cold of stone that has been in shadow all day, radiating inward. She looked at her fingers and watched it fade. She said nothing to Calder. She held it the way she held the bond, carefully, uncertainly, like something she was not yet sure how to work with. Dessa found her the following morning with the specific expression of someone who has been doing calculations overnight and does not entirely like the result. She sat Maren down in the infirmary and examined her hands and then looked at her for a long moment without speaking. "Your wolf is waking," Dessa said finally. "My wolf does not exist," Maren said. "It was assessed by 3 elders when I was 9. "Your wolf was suppressed," Dessa said, "not absent. There is a difference, and the difference matters." She folded her hands on the table. "I have been reviewing the old texts since the night you stitched him. Not the recent ones. The ones that are kept in the lower archive because they make current pack hierarchy uncomfortable." She paused. "There are accounts, very old accounts, pre-Campact, of a bloodline called the Stone-Shapers. Wolves who could not shift in the ordinary way, whose wolf nature expressed not through form but through their hands. Craftspeople, builders, people who could put their spirit into what they made and have it hold." She met Maren's eyes. "The records say the Stone-Shaper line was hunted out of existence 200 years ago, because a Stone-Shaper bonded to an alpha could anchor a pack in ways that made them effectively unbreakable, and there were those who found that prospect very threatening. The cold in Maren's hands, the wolves moving through stone, her hair that had never broken in her life, not once, no matter what was done to it. "What are you telling me?" she said. "I am telling you," Dessa said, "to be careful who learns what you are. Because the people who hunted the Stone-Shaper bloodline 2 centuries ago did not stop wanting that bloodline gone. They merely stopped finding it." Maren went back to the studio and did the only thing she knew how to do when her hands wanted to shake. She picked up a chisel and began to work. The piece that emerged from the stone over the following days was nothing she had planned. As a relief panel, a shallow carving, and what took shape in it was a landscape she had not consciously decided to make. 2 wolves running side by side through a granite valley, the stone itself flowing around them like water. The tools moved with a precision and speed she had not previously been capable of, and the shavings that fell from the work had a quality she noticed and put aside to examine later. They glowed faintly, the same cold blue-white she had seen in the dreaming wolves' pelts. She worked for 7 hours without stopping. When she set down the chisel and looked at what she had made, the panel was glowing with a light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. She covered it with canvas, shoved it to the back of the secondary workbench, sat down on the studio floor with her back against the cold stone wall, and tried to think past the noise of everything she was being asked to be. She did not succeed. After a while, she put on her coat and slipped out through the east servants' passage, down the carved mountain steps, into the lower city. She walked until she found a market square, a Wednesday market. From the look of it, produce and household goods, and a man at the far end selling knives that were not as well made as he believed. She sat on the edge of the central fountain and breathed. A child was throwing stones at a puddle. 2 women argued cheerfully about the price of dried fish. Normal sounds. The sounds of the world going about itself without reference to soul bonds or sleeping bloodlines. But she closed her eyes. She should not have closed her eyes. The hand that took her arm was fast and knew what it was doing. The cloth against her face smelled wrong, sweet in a way that nothing natural smells sweet, and the world tilted and went dark with a speed that left no room for anything except one clear thought: this is what being careless costs. She woke on stone. At least they had the decency to take her somewhere with stone floors. Packed earth with a dusting of gravel, cold and damp, the smell of deep storage, old vegetables, mineral water, kerosene from a lamp above the door. Her wrists were bound with something that was not rope, and the burn of it reached past the skin into the place where her wolf was waking, squeezing with a precise, practiced cruelty. Silver-laced cord. She had heard of it. She had not felt it before. The door opened. Elder Cass, who had declared her wolfless at 9 years old, came down the stairs. He was older. The years had not softened him. He wore the Heldrath Elder's sigil and the expression of a man who had been right about everything and was tired of waiting for the world to acknowledge this. He sat across from her. 23 soul bonds, he said, without preamble. Public knowledge now. The whole of the northern reaches knows what you did. He leaned forward. But you have any idea what you have made yourself? She said nothing. Her cheek was against the cold stone. She was reading the grain of it, which was the only thing she could think of to do. You are a weapon, Cass said. A stone-shaper bloodline bound to the dragon lord of the northern reaches. Every faction in this territory, every power that has been waiting for the Ash Compact to fracture, they will come for you. Not to use you, but to remove you. He paused. I declared you wolfless to protect you. Your mother came to Heldrath specifically because I had a reputation for honesty about assessments. She asked me to lie. To her child in front of witnesses, said it was the only way to keep you alive. Maren lifted her head from the stone floor. Cass's face, beneath the self-righteousness she had catalogued over 11 years, looked exhausted. The people who hunted the stone-shaper line did not stop. They went quiet. They have been looking steadily for any sign of the bloodline re-emerging. Your mother knew. She came to me because she was running out of time. He met her eyes. I made you small. I made you invisible. I let my son treat you like something the pack had the right to discard, because every bruise made you harder to find if anyone was looking. Something moved in his expression. I do not ask you to forgive that. I am asking you to understand that if Kaldavos cannot protect you from what is coming, you will need to know what you are. Who are they? She said. They call themselves the Iron Accord. He reached into his coat and placed a folded piece of paper on the floor between them. The names I know. There are more I don't, and Maren. He paused. There are agents inside Caldervane. I do not know which ones. I only know they are there because your mother told me, and your mother was very rarely wrong about anything. The cellar shook. Not an earthquake. Something more specific, but she felt it through the bond first. Not Calder's presence, but the sudden and total intensity of his attention, a searchlight swinging toward her with an urgency that went beyond alarm into something more ancient. His wolf had found her, and his wolf was not interested in keeping the peace. But she heard the howling in the streets above them. Not a howl exactly. More like the sound the mountain makes when the spring thaw begins, deep and inevitable and ongoing. Several voices joined it within seconds. The bond between them was so bright now it was almost loud. The ceiling cracked. Stone dust showered down. The cellar door did not open. It left, removed from its frame by a force that sent it across the room in a single piece. But Calder came through the opening in a half-shift she had no reference for. Still upright, still human in shape, but expanded, wrong-proportioned in the way of something that has outgrown its form. His hands ended in the thick, dark claws of a dragon lord's true nature, and his eyes had gone from granite grey to silver-white, casting actual light in the dim cellar. He saw her. He saw the silver-laced cord. The sound he made was not a growl. Owls have a ceiling. This did not. Across the room, and his claws separated the cord in 2 passes, precise as a carver's cut, and the pieces fell away, and she looked at the burns on her wrists. And then she looked at his face while he looked at them, and she understood in that moment that she was going to have to speak very quickly. "Wait," she said. He had already turned toward Cass. "Wait." She grabbed his arm, the one that ended in claws, and held on with both hands. The bond between them was a feedback loop of her pain meeting his fury, meeting her need for him to hear her, and the whole of it was almost more than she could hold. He protected me. Badly, in ways I cannot excuse, but he protected me. Calder looked at her. The silver-white light in his eyes flickered, his human mind reasserting itself over the wolf by the particular, enormous effort of will that only people who have had to practice it can manage. "He burned your wrists," he said. His voice was barely speech. "I know, and I am asking you to hear him before you make a decision you can't unmake. There are names, Calder. Names inside the city. We need them." The effort it cost him was visible. She felt it through the bond like watching a river decide to change course, not the decision of a moment, but the accumulated weight of a changed landscape. Slowly, the claws retracted. The half-shift receded, pulled her against him and pressed his face into her hair and stood there breathing, just breathing. She felt his heartbeat through his chest wall, felt it slow beat by beat until it matched hers the way the bond had always made it do. "Speak," he said to Cass without moving. "You have until I decide. I've heard enough." Cass spoke. He said everything he had said to Maren, plus more. The history of the Iron Accord, the manner in which they had sustained themselves across 2 centuries by embedding in high-functioning packs and waiting. The particular threat that a stone shaper, bonded to a dragon lord, represented to everything they had maintained. Calder listened without moving. When Cass finished, he said, "You will remain in this city under my guard. If what you have said is accurate, I need you alive to verify intelligence. If it is not, you will regret surviving the last 26 years. He stepped back, keeping Maren close. "Those are the only terms available." Cass nodded. He looked at Maren with the expression of someone who has done the only thing they knew how to do, and is not certain, looking back, that they chose correctly. "I am not asking for absolution," he said. "I am asking you to be careful. I know how to be careful," she said. "I have been being careful my entire life." He had nothing to say to that. They returned to the keep in the dark, as Calder carried her up the carved mountain steps, one arm under her knees and one behind her back, because the silver burns had left her shaking in a way she couldn't control, and because his wolf would not permit her feet to touch the ground while she was hurt. She protested once. He didn't acknowledge it. Protested again. He said, very quietly, "You can argue with me tomorrow," and she decided this was reasonable and pressed her face into his neck and breathed. Dessa dressed the burns in the infirmary, wrapped her wrists in clean linen, and told Calder that what she needed was rest and what he needed was to stop looking like the edge of a shattered stone face before someone got hurt. "She needs sleep," Dessa said, "without you in the room radiating catastrophe." Calder looked at Maren. She felt him through the bond, his wolf's absolute, structural unwillingness to be on the other side of a closed door from her. She understood it because she felt the corresponding pull from her own side, the 23 threads between them holding taut. "Go," she said softly. "I will be here in the morning. I am not going anywhere." He crossed to the bed and knelt beside it, bringing his eyes level with hers. He held her bandaged hand with a steadiness that had no performance in it. "Every cold night," he said, "every door that was slammed, everything they took from you." He pressed his mouth to the linen above the burn. "I am going to return all of it, not by matching it, by replacing it entirely." He left, but she dreamed of stone. The wolves moved through it, silver-white and half-light, and the female with the scarred muzzle stood before her in a forest of granite pillars and said, "You know what you are. You have always known, but you are a maker. What do makers do with broken things?" "We rebuild them," Maren said, "but differently, not back to what they were, forward to what they should have been." The wolf pressed her nose to Maren's hand. "Then rebuild," she said. But she woke at first light with her wolf so present and insistent that the surface of her skin hurt with the pressure of it. She walked to the studio in the pre-dawn grey. It stood in the center of the room under the angled glass of the north-facing ceiling and closed her eyes. The wolf was not small. She had feared it would be after all those years of compression. It was not small, and it was not cowering, and it was not what Elder Cass had built a lie around when she was 9. It was enormous and luminous and white as fresh quarry-cut marble, and it had been folded into a space far too small for it for 26 years. And it was done. The shift did not hurt. It felt like a fracture releasing, like the moment a block of stone splits cleanly along its natural grain. Not destruction, resolution. White fur, the cold blue-white light of the dreaming wolves, now coming from inside her own skin. The world rebuilt itself around changed senses, edges sharpening to crystal clarity, sound expanding to fill in the spaces between sounds, and through the bond. Far below, 3 floors down, the precise moment Calder's heartbeat stuttered and caught and accelerated. Because he felt it through their connection. He felt her wolf emerge. She was larger than she should have been. She caught her reflection in the angled glass ceiling, an enormous white wolf standing in a studio full of stone-carver's tools under north-facing light, and something moved in her that was not quite laughter, but was close enough that her tail swept the floor once, which startled her, and then amused her, which swept it again. The door opened. Calder stood in the frame, still half-dressed from sleep, barefoot on the studio floor. His grey eyes had gone very wide and very bright, and she could see the scars on his torso where her stitches had been. Faint pink lines in the shape of her work, a permanent record of the night she had used what she had. He looked at her, his white wolf, the last of a bloodline 2 centuries of fear had tried to erase. He dropped to his knees. Not submission. Something older than submission. Something she thought the word reverence came close to, without landing. Padded toward him, her paws soundless on the stone, and pressed her head against his chest. His arms came around her neck. She felt his face in her fur. She felt the dampness there, and the knowledge of it, that the dragon lord of the northern reaches was weeping in a stone-carver's studio at dawn, settled into her bones and stayed. All 23 bonds sang, word travels in a keep faster than fire. By midday the city knew. The following morning, every hold in the reaches had received the news. Calder Voss's bonded mate was not a wolfless ward. She was a stone shaper, the first in 200 years, soul bonded to the Dragon Lord in a binding that the elders had been arguing about for 2 days without reaching agreement, except on the point that it was irreversible and unprecedented, and therefore almost certainly going to reshape everything. Sable came to the studio with the look of someone who has been running calculations since dawn and is cautiously satisfied with the results. They talked for a long time about what to do with the information and the shape of what was coming. Lady Isolde arrived 2 days later, not to the studio this time. She came to Maren in the corridor outside the Great Hall in a particular ambush formation of someone who has decided that a controlled location is no longer available to them. But she said nothing immediately. She looked at Maren with the assessing gaze she had turned on the studio furnishings on her first visit. Then she said very precisely, "I understand you have not yet decided to remain." "I am here," Maren said. "You are present," Lady Isolde said. "That is not the same." She paused. "I will not tell you I was wrong to position Anya. I believed it was what the hold needed. I also believed." She stopped, restarted. "I believed a wolfless ward with stone compound under her fingernails was not what my son needed." Her eyes moved over Maren's face. "I was working with incomplete information." "Yes," Maren said. "You were." The silence between them was not comfortable. But it was honest, and Maren had spent enough of her life in comfortable dishonesty to know which she preferred. "He has not worn his father's crest since the old Dragon Lord died," Lady Isolde said. "He wore it this morning, because you made him something to carry it on." Maren said nothing. "I am not asking for your forgiveness," Lady Isolde said. "I am telling you what I saw. It was not an apology, but it was a door left open, and Maren had spent years working with stone that looked closed and was not. You learn to recognize the grain. You learn to place your chisel at the line." The bonding ceremony was held that night in the Great Hall, because Sable had asked whether there was any reason to wait, and neither of them could name one. The fire burned high and threw long shadows across the carved stone of the walls. The whole hold gathered, warriors and healers and craftspeople and children who had been told to go to bed and had not, because some nights you simply do not, and everyone present understood this was one of those nights. Maren stood before Calder in the firelight. She was wearing the garment she had altered on her second night in the city, the one she had remade from what she had, stitched invisibly at the seams in the way she stitched everything, so that the repair became part of the structure. She was thin from 11 years of eating after everyone else. She was scarred from 11 years of work that was not designed to protect her hands. It was not what anyone in that hall had imagined when they imagined their Dragon Lord's bonded lady. She was exactly what he had been waiting for, in the way that sometimes the stone you have been trying to place waits in the quarry until the right hand comes for it. He held her face and she let him, and the vulnerability of it, the willingness, the choice, sent all 23 threads vibrating at once. He marked her at the curve of her neck where it met her shoulder. The pain was real and immediate, and faded almost instantly into something she had no previous frame for. Completion, like the last stone seated in an arch, the structure suddenly bearing its own weight, needing no scaffolding, needing nothing further. "Mine," he said against her neck. "Mine," she said back, and she meant it as he meant it. Not possession but belonging, not ownership but recognition, the naming of what had always been true. The hall erupted, howls, but ceremonial, not restrained. The full-throated sound of a pack claiming its own, welcoming home what it had not known was missing. It moved through the stone of the walls and the floor, and up through the soles of her feet, and she felt it in every bond, all 23 threads ringing. Elder Cass stood in the back under guard, watching. His face showed nothing readable, but his eyes were wet, and Maren saw it, and filed it where she filed most things that required time to know what to do with. In the months that followed, the Caldervane studio became something she had not planned for it to be. She trained 2 apprentices, both young wolves from lesser packs who had been assessed as low value by elders who had not been curious enough to look carefully. She taught them what she knew about reading stone, about where the grain ran and where the fractures wanted to form, and how to tell the difference between a flaw that would fail and a line that was simply the truth of the material. The iron accord sent 3 agents in the spring. Sable's network identified 2 before they crossed the gate. The 3rd made it as far as the studio corridor before Calder's wolves found him. The Dragon Lord wore the stone panel she had carved, but as jewelry or crest, mounted in the wall of the great hall, where the morning light hit it at the angle she had calculated when she chose the placement, making the carved wolves seem to move. The first warm evening after the pass opened was in the studio, with the windows cracked and the smell of thawed earth coming in for the first time. The particular green and mineral smell of the northern reaches in spring, a smell she had not known until this winter because she had spent her life inside. She heard him before she saw him, not his footsteps, his heartbeat, coming up the stairs, steady and familiar as the strike of a mallet against stone. He stood in the doorway and watched her work. "What are you making?" he asked. "Come and see." He crossed the studio and stood behind her, his chest against her back, his chin resting lightly on the top of her head. She heard him go still. He was working on a small piece, a relief carving on a piece of pale limestone, and what was taking shape in it was 2 wolves carved so closely together that in places their forms shared lines, the boundary between them becoming a shared edge rather than a separation. Between them, barely legible unless you knew to look, was a 3rd shape. Small, just beginning. "Maren," he said. His voice had changed into something careful and held. He took his hand and pressed it flat against her stomach, where she had been aware, for 2 weeks now, of something new. Not one of the 23 threads between them. Something with its own pulse, its own presence, its own particular quality, like finding a new vein of stone in a quarry you thought you knew completely. His hand trembled against her. The Dragon Lord of the northern reaches, who had held Calder Mount against 3 sieges and rebuilt the Ash Compact from pieces, stood in a stone-carver's studio with his palm against his mate's belly and shook. She covered his hand with hers. Outside the angled glass ceiling, the mountain city caught the last of the evening light and held it. She picked up her chisel one final time, placed it at the unfinished edge of the small shape between the wolves, struck it once, clean and certain, feeling the stone give the way stone gives when you find the right line. The chip fell away, the shape resolved. She set the chisel down and looked at what she'd had made. She did not name it. Some things do not need to be named to be real. Some things you simply look at and know.